Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is the webinar on microaggression in the workplace and, well, what are your rights and how do you deal with it? We have a 12 o'clock start today, but I'm conscious that for a lot of people, it may be that they're not able to be here as prompt as possible. So I'm just going to do a very slow and calm introduction, just to give them a couple of minutes, and then we'll launch into the webinar for today. So as you can see, my name is Paula Rhone-Adrien. I'm a practicing barrister and mediator. I'm based at Lamb Building Chambers, which is in central London, and I've been practicing now for over 20 years. And this topic that I will be conducting today in the webinar is very close to my heart. As a mediator over the last about 10 to 12 years, I've done a lot of mediations in relation to the workplace and disputes arising out of workplace relationships. And it's over those last 10 to 12 years that I've seen this movement from the managing overt aggression, the behaviour of overt aggression, to the more subtle, nuanced, microaggressive behaviour, and really helping people to understand, adapt to it, and really how to challenge it in a productive way, constructive way, without damaging that very important employer-employee or co-worker relationship. So let's get started then. Title: Microaggression in the Workplace, Your Rights and How to Deal with It. Many of us, of course, post this pandemic, are now entering a new world of the workplace. It doesn't exist anymore in the way that we were once used to. A lot of us are working from home. A lot of us have been given the choice to work from home and the continuation of that. But this lecture is still going to be relevant. You still have a connection with your work colleagues. Of course, you still have a connection with your boss. And the types of behaviour that would have impacted upon you on that day-to-day basis, you may not have that now, but of course, you're going to be affected in different ways, in new ways, and it's really being aware of those new challenges that I'm going to be addressing at the end of the lecture. So we'll start by looking at the traditional workplace. Some of us, of course, have had to go back to work recently. Some of us are doing this hybrid kind of thing now. I am in court, where we are working sometimes from home and sometimes back in the office. And as I said, some of us now are having the option to work from home completely. But that doesn't change that relationship that exists. And what we're going to be looking at, what we're going to be focusing on, as I said, is the relationship and how people manage that relationship in relation to aggression, how people are able to constructively deal with it, what your options are, what your rights are, and if all else fails, what do you do next? So those are the things that I'm going to be covering today. And of course, if you want to ask me any questions, then please do. We've got the Q&A box. You should be able to see that on your screen. Please post some questions. And as we come to the end of my webinar, I will, of course, answer as many of them as possible. So we're on to the first slide. We're looking at aggression, and I appreciate that this may be an obvious, simple place to start, but bear with me. We've got the identity markers. The very obvious one that we see is this first one here of proactive aggression. It's a purposeful, planned attack. And the example that I give there is one of bullying or stalking, or when you're ambushing someone. What the person who is a proactive aggressor does is that their action is, it's planned. They have a thought process in mind where the outcome is very much to disturb the person that they are inflicting their negative action upon. And I'm sure we have, unfortunately, all of us come across people like that within the workplace, and they, of course, can be incredibly destructive in the workplace. We then have the reactive aggressor, and this name actually doesn't belie what the true meaning is. The reactive aggressor is not so much somebody who says, I'm being attacked and so I'm going to attack you back. The reactive aggressor is somebody who sees a situation, and in judging that situation, they believe that they're under attack, and so they immediately attack back. And again, I'm sure we can think of lots of people. You might refer to them as being, oh, so-and-so is very prickly, or oh, don't get on the wrong side of so-and-so. It's that type of person that I'm referencing there with the reactive aggression. So they're looking at a frustrating event, and instead of managing that frustration in the calm way, their reaction is to explode. And I use the examples there of, a fight arising out of the mutual insults or an impulsive loss of control. Then we have this third area of identified aggression, and I'm talking about identity on the basis of a psychological framework. Passive aggression was really identified in World War II when we looked at soldiers who struggled, obviously, to follow orders and struggled to identify with the one unified course of action. And of course, they couldn't just fling down their weapons and walk off. And so what they would do is they would take an order, say that they would obviously do what they were asked, but then do it in the most difficult way possible. So they couldn't necessarily be reprimanded for their behaviour, but they were very clearly showing that they didn't want to cooperate. So that's the passive aggressive person. It's the negative and indirect reaction to something, as opposed to you expressly saying, well, hang on a minute, I'm really not happy doing this, and I'm not happy doing this because of X, Y, and Z. That's our passive aggressive person. So that's the three identities in regards to aggression that psychologically we've been able to identify over the last 60 to 70 odd years. But then we move to this new area, and that's my next slide, this new area of microaggression. And it's been a fascinating, really fascinating dialogue that's, I think, arisen over the last, 7 to 10 years or so, when people have been looking at those subtle, nuanced actions of microaggression and what they actually mean and how they can be managed and dealt with. It's a statement or action, and I've given you a very, very basic definition here, but it's a statement or action, subtle and even unintentional sometimes, but that can lead the other person to feel less favourably treated, even discriminated against. And when we look at the definition of microaggression, we are talking about an act that is generally enacted against somebody who is identified as a category in, and I say there, the Equalities Act of 2010. I don't like using the word minority, but it's a word I'm sure that you're familiar with. And so when you talk about microaggression, you're talking about an act that is, as I say, focused against somebody who is in a group that would be identified as a minority. And we talk about women, we talk about people of colour, we talk about people who have a disability, etc., etc. And we're not only talking about one act of microaggression, which it could be. There is case law where just one act is sufficient. We are also talking about a cumulative effect of minor incidences that allow that particular group to feel as if they've been marginalised, as I said earlier, to feel as if they've been less favourably treated. And I go on to give some examples in this PowerPoint slide of what microaggression could be. And I'd be interested to see if any of you can think of some or have any questions that you'd like to ask me about your own experiences. So we're talking about a very classic scenario of where you're in a meeting and you may be one of few females, you may be one of few people of colour, you may be one of few people with a disability. What happens is that you may raise your hand to make a comment. Other people have made comments. Their comments may have been dismissed. But the fact is they were listened to, they were heard, and there was a discussion, there was a debate around their comments. You raise your hand to make a comment, to add to that debate, and there's a roll of eyes, or you're dismissed and you're told that, oh, we don't have enough time for that, or, you know, you get 2 or 3 words out and there's an audible groan, or the person who is chairing the meeting looks away. Enough of those social cues for you to understand very clearly that you've been dismissed. Another example that I've given there, the references of your identity, your origins. A classic example is somebody who is British born, English born, Welsh born, Scottish born, but they're a person of colour, and somebody will say to them, oh, so where are you from? And you give the response, I'm from Luton, I'm from Manchester, wherever, and the person immediately says, no, I mean, where are you really from? And it's that kind of level of questioning, pushing to one side your answer, because what they really want to know is about your ethnic heritage, as if it makes a difference. I'm not quite clear why, but there's a classic example. Or another classic example is you're about to be married and your boss says, well, I'm sure that your priorities are probably going to change now, aren't they, now that you're married, saying this to a female. Or if they said to you, oh, so how long is it going to be until you plan on having children? As if that's, again, a question relevant to your work environment. It just simply isn't. But you're left with a cue, aren't you, this social cue that, is this something that I need to think about? Is there going to be a problem at some point in the future if I return, or if I go to my boss and say, now I'm pregnant? Another example that I've given there about derogatory assumptions, the one we could use just there about you getting married, but another classic example is if you're of, let's say, Chinese origin, Asian origin, and you ask to go on a particular course, and the course provider turns around and says, I'm not sure this course would really suit you. Maybe you want to go down a more mathematical route. There's one on accountancy and bookkeeping, that kind of classic racist stereotype that because you are of Asian origin, that somehow you are more familiar or comfortable with figures. So it's those types of examples that I give with microaggression in the workplace. But of course, there's so much more. And as I said, I'm sure you're going to educate me, because time after time, day after day, I learn about new ways in which, sadly, we can cause each other harm. But remember about microaggression, it doesn't have to be intentional. And this is where we start to get complicated. Let's look at the next slide. Microaggression, or perhaps you're just too sensitive. If microaggression can be an unintentional act, are we being too sensitive? Am I being just a little bit too touchy when somebody says to me, oh no, but Paula, where are you really from? When they ask that question of me, surely my response should be, oh, do you mean where am I originally from? Or where does my heritage originate from? Oh, I'm from Jamaica. Should that have been my natural response? Perhaps. And, you know, let's be honest. If you are dealing with a situation where you have a relationship with this person, or even if you don't have a relationship with this person, we all know about social cues. And we all know about some people who have no idea about social cues, and they just say it how it is, and that's just who they are. You can read a situation very well, and you obviously should learn to trust your instincts in regards to that situation. You know if something doesn't feel right. Nobody else has to tell you about whether something feels right or not. And so if it feels wrong to you, then there is nothing that should stop you from saying, hang on a minute, I didn't like that. And just saying to yourself, why didn't I like that? What's happened here that has made me feel uncomfortable? Looking at the slide, is there really a problem? Or are you just being oversensitive? Are you having a bad day today? Have you had a couple of run-ins with this person before? Have you had something negative happen to you recently that is similar to this scenario? And so you are automatically viewing the two scenarios in the same light. Those are the kind of questions that you should ask yourself. And also think about, how are you feeling over the day? I know, again, this probably sounds really straightforward, but let me tell you, in my job, where I spend arguing every single day, you can very easily become upset about something before you take a step back from the situation, come back and look at it in a couple of hours and try and reassess it again. When you have that initial conversation, do all of those things that you advise somebody else to do, because we've all been there, haven't we? We've always said to somebody else, take a step back, take a couple of hours, take a breath, hang on a minute, let's kind of look at it from the other side. There's not a problem with you doing that. Having said that, once you have done those things and you think, actually, I'm still upset, I'm still hurt, then you want to think about, well, I have this concern. Do I feel free to express it? Or am I fearful about approaching this person? Because to me, in my experience, when I mediate matters, that's always one of the cues that a person will ask themselves about whether they should actually really have an issue here. Because if it wasn't really an issue, then you would have turned to Steve or Shaquille or whoever it was, and you would have said to them straight away, you've upset me when you raised that topic, or did you realise that you hurt my feelings, or whatever it is you want to express to them. If you do not feel free to express that concern, if you do feel fearful, then that worries me. Because that means that you're in a situation where, first, you have suffered a hurt, and secondly, there is no ability, or you don't feel that you have the ability to deal with that issue. And now we are starting to look at a microaggressive scenario. What about training? I asked this question here because have you attended any courses? Has your HR department, and I don't know how big your team is, but has your workplace provided you with an opportunity for training in this area? Because if it has, go back to the procedure, go back to the manual, go back to the training papers. They really will help you to remind yourself about the parameters that you want to create for yourself and that you think are appropriate for your work environment. And if you are of the opinion that these have been challenged in a negative way, be they intentional or unintentional, and I'll keep repeating that, then you can feel more confident about saying, well, something's happened and I wasn't happy about it. I spent time thinking about it. I've tried to address it. but I'm now concerned and I feel fearful about addressing it. And when I look back at my training, or when I look back at a manual, I see that I have done those things. I've built my foundation and my framework, and I still have concerns. So, is your complaint going to stifle freedom of expression? I flip it now and I say to you, you have this complaint and you want to take it to someone, but in taking it to someone, you are concerned that the response is going to be, come on, Paula, really? Surely you don't want to stop Jane or Mary from asking what are really simple questions, and you would be shackling their freedom to have an open discussion with you. Surely you don't want them to feel that they have been shut down. Surely, Paula, you don't want them to feel unable to have a conversation with you. And so what happens to Mary or Jane is that they retreat, that Mary and Jane only speak to Mary and Jane because, my God, I'm frightened. I daren't say anything to Paula in case I upset her. Are you worried that that's the response that you might get if you raise that? And it's a good concern to have, because this is a debate that is happening across the HR industries. This is a debate that is happening throughout psychology and psychology in the workplace. You have on the one hand somebody who says they are suffering the subtle nuanced harm. You have the person who intentionally or unintentionally has said these things that have caused the harm. And you are in this position, be that you, be that HR or your employer, be that the other person, of where either side may feel that their ability to express themselves is being shackled. How do you manage that? And should you, as the perceived victim, have to take on board what the perceived perpetrator, be they intentional or unintentional, what their feelings and emotions are in that situation? How is that going to be managed? And is that a responsibility that you should have to deal with, as I say, as the perceived victim? So then you have to consider approaching HR. And I don't know how small your organisation is, but if you're lucky enough to be in a large organisation and you're lucky enough to have a relationship with somebody in that department, then go to them, speak to them. If you're in an organisation where the HR department is small or even non-existent, or dare I say, you are in a FOB, a family-owned business, this is where we start to get a little bit more tricky. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be challenged. And it doesn't mean it can't be challenged. And it doesn't mean, most importantly, that you as the victim and your views cannot be equally considered as the intentional or unintentional alleged perpetrator. Let's see how by looking at the next slide. Look at the first steps in regards to tackling abuse. What are those first steps going to be? We're in the workplace, we're at home, we're in the canteen, wherever it is we may be, and an incident occurs. And this incident may be a one-off, or this incident may well be a cumulative effect. What's the first thing we do? Well, the first thing we do is, as I've referenced earlier, we take a breath, we consider it, we go over it in our minds. We are left, though, still feeling that concern. And so what do? We take that concern to somebody who may not be in that workplace environment. It may be a family member, it may be a friend. At this point, I say to you, be careful of the well-intentioned family member or friend. They love you and only want the best for you. And it breaks their heart to see that you are suffering pain. And when you take a problem to a friend or a family member, they want to find that solution for you. And sometimes that solution may not be a reality for you because you understand that workplace environment so much clearer, obviously, than they do. But that doesn't mean you can't find solace in their words. And that doesn't mean that you can't share it with them. But the reality is, as I say, be careful, because in their attempt to do well by you, it may be that because they don't understand that workplace reality, that they can't help you in the way that you would hope that they could. So where else do you go? Is there somebody in the office that you can trust? Is there somebody in the office who you feel would understand your predicament? And it doesn't necessarily have to be the person that you sit next to or the person that you hang out with in the kitchen. It could be somebody who is in the next office or somebody that you respect, who you can take this problem to. You don't have to identify the person in this story. You don't have to say, so-and-so did this to me and this is how I feel. You can take it objectively to this person who you respect in the workplace and see if they can help and offer you any advice about those first steps to tackling the problem. What about the tactical steps that you may want to employ yourself without there being a confrontation? And I say those tactical steps that you have to employ. Sadly, of course, the question of challenging this behaviour at the first instance rests with you. And that's massive, because we are dealing with such subtle behaviour, because we're dealing with such nuanced behaviour, and because of its impact on you, which everybody else in the office may not even notice, it may not even register with them. Unless you feel able and capable to challenge that behaviour, it's never going to go away. And so what tactical steps can you take if you feel confident about challenging that behaviour? And I use this word challenging, but I absolutely mean this in the way where you are not going to draw a confrontational issue out of the scenario. And let me go back to one of the original examples that I gave you, where you're sitting in the meeting and you're trying to raise your arm and answer a question, and you eventually get the opportunity to say those two words and you've been shut down. Now, you could feel confident enough to say in the meeting, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I haven't finished, I'm conscious of the time, just give me 2 minutes," and finish what you're saying. If you don't feel confident to immediately challenge that kind of scenario, then when you are away from that public meeting, you could say to the person, "I didn't get an opportunity to finish what I was saying earlier. This is what I wanted to say." So you're in no way challenging the fact that they've cut you off. All you're doing is allowing yourself the opportunity to be heard. That's a really non-confrontational way of tackling the behaviour that dismissed you earlier. What about the other classic example I gave you? Oh, where are you from, Paula? No, I mean originally. In that conversation, you can say, "Well, originally, I am from England. Are you asking about where my parents are from or where my grandparents are from?" Throw the question back to the person who was asking you. Highlight in that conversation that they needed to think more carefully about what they were asking you. Again, that doesn't have to be confrontational. That's a conversation, and you are helping that person to understand how what they have said was not the correct thing to say. You will get from that conversation whether the person is genuine in regards to them not understanding what they had said was wrong, or that they meant to either passively or in a microaggressive way insult you. I'm conscious about the time, guys, and I'm conscious I want to answer you some questions, so I'm going to move through a bit faster. Let's look at microaggression and if the first steps don't succeed. I've question marked company policy. And again, we're looking at how large your organisation is, because we've got to be practical here. We're looking at if you're a family-owned business. We're looking at if you are part of essentially, less than 10, less than 20 staff. If there isn't a company policy in place, you take that opportunity to create one. Say, I'm very conscious about what's going on at the moment out there in the world, in the workplace. What's our company policy on this? Oh, there isn't one? Do you know what? I'm going to take responsibility for creating one. I really look forward to doing that. I'd really, want you to encourage me to do this. And go ahead and do it. Write it up. There's loads of things on the internet that you can pull from various places and put a policy together. You don't have to sit there and physically write it out yourself. So it could be quite a nice and easy task to do. And then that allows you to start working on a foundation for your work colleagues and your employer. Obviously, if you are in a larger organisation, there should be a policy in place already. And if there isn't, highlight it and make some suggestions about what you would want to see. If there isn't the company policy, what about training? If your employer is prepared to support you and really have that expectation that they should, ask to be sent on a training course or ask for somebody to come in-house, research what's available and bring that person in. Sell it to your employer, sell it to your work colleagues, take that half a day out and let's help each other understand about how they should be conducting themselves appropriately in the workplace. What about a grievance procedure? Are we at the stage now where the behaviour hasn't changed? Your first steps haven't worked. Are we going down the formal route of where we are speaking to HR and nothing has changed? Feel supported. I don't know if there's a trade union on board. There may well be. If there isn't, speak to a friend, speak to HR. Feel supported in this process. Understand the grievance policy that exists in your workplace and try and make sure that it is properly adhered to. It's not nice going through a grievance process. I'm not even going to begin to lie. And I'm not aware of all of your backgrounds. But what I see as a mediator when people eventually raise a grievance is fear, and more fear. And I see it on both sides. Because what happens is that the views of both sides become entrenched. And it's difficult to work your way out of that without having somebody who is objective and can come in and allow the lines of communication to become open. It may be that in the grievance procedure, you do have a possibility to mediate. And if you don't have that in your grievance policy, I would definitely recommend it. My goodness, we're at the stage where there is a potential for an employment tribunal. Since 2017, you may not be aware, but since 2017, there are no longer charges that apply to somebody bringing a claim in an employment tribunal. You are free to do that if you are so concerned about the way that your grievance has been managed. And remember, you don't have to have left your employment to bring an employment tribunal matter. That's something to bear in mind. If you get to that stage, then please feel free to ask me some questions, but I won't delve on the legal aspects too much. But of course, you know that you have your rights. You know that the Equality Act 2010 forms the basis of those statutory rights. And it is somewhere where you can go to reference yourself in regards to your feelings of ill treatment and your feelings of less favourable treatment. or just leave. Is that an answer for you? Is that a realistic option for you? And I know people say, if you don't deal with the problem will follow you elsewhere. But sometimes it may actually be the answer. Because what is important for you is that you get up, that you go to work, and that you're respected whilst you're doing that job. And if you can't maintain that level of respect that you deserve, if you think that the problem of microaggression in your workplace runs so deeply that you alone cannot change that ethos, or it's just too much for you to do that, then leaving is an option. And you don't have to feel that it's a weakness. You don't have to feel defeated. It's an option for you, because that allows you to move on to another successful point in your life. Remember, when you are leaving, what your rights are. You can, of course, resign. And in resigning, ensure that your reference and who you're going to obtain your reference from is identified. Make sure that you've identified that person before you leave. Make sure that you're clear about what appears on your HR record, on your file. You have a right to that information, and you have a right to challenge what's in that file and make any corrections or make any comments, and for those comments to appear on the file if you want. Let's move to the next slide. So finally, microaggression and moving forward, because that's what this is all about. You have a problem, you identify the problem, and you solve the problem. You can stay because you have felt confident and able to deal with the problem. Or you can choose to go because you have still dealt with the problem. However, the issues are far bigger, and quite frankly, you have far better things to be doing somewhere else. The COVID pandemic, it's changed the face, apologies for that spelling error, it's changed the face of workplace. We know that the opportunity to work from home now exists in reality, as opposed to just in some policy, some family-friendly policy that's buried in the depths of a cupboard somewhere. This is going to change the workplace relationship. And some of us are going to confront new scenarios of aggressive types that psychologists are yet to identify. The behaviour in the workplace is going to be different. How you manage yourself and how you manage others is going to be different. What's important is that you are alive to those differences and that you are prepared to address them. So if, as an HR member, you have somebody coming to you and saying, look, I feel uncomfortable about this, I feel uncomfortable about that. It doesn't have to have a title. You can just feel uncomfortable. The fact is, it needs to be addressed. And how you can proactively address that is what's really going to mean the success of your workplace environment. Have I got any questions, Ellie? Let's see. I can see that there are some. I'm going to try and pull them up. Yes, so that's fantastic. I've got Lily. Thank you, Lily. I'm so glad it's been so helpful. It's true, the first instance is exhausting. And yes, I don't like using the word victim either. So apologies if I've insulted anyone. You're right, they shouldn't have to prove themselves, but we all know that sadly that's the reality. Unless you are able to bring that issue to the forefront, people's behaviour will continue, and people won't, again, trying to look at this positively, people won't learn. And ultimately, and I'm prepared to accept this, we all have a responsibility to help people learn if we can. And if I can help somebody learn by identifying something that they've said to me that I may find insulting, then I think I should do so. But thank you for pointing that out, Lily. Isabel, You're saying if you're considering raising a grievance, but you don't know how, if you have hard evidence of microaggression and not been written down, or it's hard to explain how it's made someone feel, would you recommend the process for this situation? Do you know what? Absolutely. And I can see further down, we've got somebody quite rightly raising the fact that we really rely on notes, contemporaneous notes. This is me putting my barrister's head back on. And when I spoke to you earlier about first instances, this is a point that I should have actually raised. When you're raising, even before you think of going down that procedural grievance route, you want to think about writing down what's happened. And again, I know it sounds really basic, and I know we always tell there's someone else over there to do it, but just take that minute to write down what has happened to you. And if you have a number of scenarios, write them down. Because not only does it allow you to look back and reconsider and assess, but it allows that person who is second party, third party, fourth party removed to really step into your shoes and to objectively consider what's going on without that emotion. Because obviously you're only going to express yourself emotionally. It's you that's been upset. But when you sit down and write what's happened, it really does help. And it's also obviously a fantastic aid memoir, because when you are going down that formal route, you will need dates, you will need times, and you will need to recall what has been said to you. And that's always difficult when emotions come into the mix. Gillian, yes, it was you, Gillian. You said I'd definitely keep a diary, dates, times, what's happened and how it's made you feel. Absolutely, totally agree with that. It's a piece of advice that I repeat time and time and time and time again. So thanks for reminding me, Gillian. Jane, you're saying, as an Irish person, I've been told to my face that I'm stupid. Last Christmas in St Ives in Cornwall, a stranger came up to me and said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm Irish." She said, "Yes, thought so. Don't like Irish people." And then she walked off. I've had this throughout my life. I'm working on it, not letting it anger me and pushing it back on the perpetrator. Oh my God, Jane, I can so sympathise with you. I've been told, oh my God, if only you weren't black, you would be such a great friend. I've been told, you're a bit prickly. That's a classic. Oh, she's a bit prickly. Or she's very aggressive. No, I can just stick up for myself. Whereas a lot of people struggle to stick up for themselves. They turn inward, and that's completely understandable. Jane, you're right about, the whole kind of allowing it to anger you and pushing it back on the perpetrator. Can I just share something? And I'm really conscious of the time. I am sitting here discussing this with you, like I'm so confident and, oh, this is what you need to do and that is what you need to do. When I was younger and I had some horrific scenarios, I was criticised about my hair. I was told, you shouldn't really wear your hair like that. It's very messy. No one wants to see a barrister with messy hair. And I was like, oh, but my hair's not messy. I never said anything. I internalised it. And it affected me so badly that it got to a stage where I lost my voice. I lost my voice, guys. And can you imagine, as a barrister, it's not the best thing to happen. But I actually lost the ability to speak because I was so hurt, and I just didn't know what to do. I just didn't know how to express myself and express myself to the person who was hurting me in a way that wasn't going to be confrontational, but in a way that I was able to feel that I had been able to validate myself. Because ultimately, this is what it's about. You mustn't feel ashamed, and you mustn't feel that you shouldn't be the person who you are. And it's how you go about doing that. And there are ways that you are going to find comfortable about doing that. I've given you examples, but you might not be comfortable with that. Think about ways that are comfortable for you to address those. Okay, I've got a question from Sangeeta. Hi, Sangeeta. Paula, thank you. How do I know what information is on my HR record? Ask. And you may be given excuses, Sangeeta, but you can ask to see it. You can ask to go to the HR office if it's in an office. You can ask to be sent to you if you're online. Say, I'd like an hour over my lunch break. on the 14th of August, and I'm going to come and I'm going to read my file, please. And yeah, and I'd be very interested to see what response you got. It's a classic that I have to deal with a lot in mediation, and the problem is this privacy and secrecy. Remember, it's about you. It's about your information and the way you have conducted yourself in the workplace and things that have been said about you. And those things may have been said unfairly. You have a right to challenge those. Heather, are you able to recommend any people or organisations we can go to for advice on how to handle instances when they happen, e.g. mentoring, coaching or advice services on how to challenge what steps, or to take a case-by-case basis, especially as a woman or as a woman with additional diverse characteristics? Can I answer that question in the general now? And if it's possible, I don't know Ellie. Ellie works with us, obviously, and manages this. Ellie, I don't know if it's possible for people to email me directly. I'm very happy to answer people's questions directly as well. But when you talk about generality, we are talking about ACAS. They will accept contact with people who aren't even members. They're incredibly helpful. Your Citizens Advice Bureau, they can be incredibly helpful. If you are seriously concerned about your legal position, then a lot of employment law solicitors will offer you half an hour's consultation for free. So there's that as an option as well. And you have lots of networking, women networking agencies. But what you want to be able to do is to find one local to your area. And again, I don't know how big your HR department is, but your HR department may have a list that are relevant to your particular area. Or Google it, because they'll come up in your area. Networking and things like that will always come up in the area. So try that as well. Lisa, people are unbelievable. Yes, they are. It's awful to hear these experiences. A receptionist told my interviewer not to hire me because I had messy hair. Yeah, it's a classic. It is a classic. I've got messy hair, apparently. So yeah, I hear it. People are unbelievable. And you know what we were talking about earlier that I'd referenced about this debate that's running at the moment about, well, am I, by suggesting that I've suffered a microaggressive act, am I shackling the person's freedom of expression because we should be allowed to just say what we want and do what we want? You're in the workplace environment. And so there has to be an appropriate way that you conduct yourself. I am not suggesting to you that if we are, in the park, or if we're in the pub, or, if you're at home, that I am attempting to shackle your freedom of expression. What I am attempting to do is to educate you, is to help you understand that there is an appropriate way to behave in the workplace environment. Oh, you're so welcome, Sangeeta, you're so welcome. Philippa, can we go back to a previous organisation asking to see what's in their records regarding ourselves for the time we worked there? Absolutely. One thing that I have loved as a lawyer, as a barrister, many people don't, is freedom of expression and how that works with the Information Commissioner and data protection. It's a wonderful tool actually for you to be able to use. You can ask anybody who holds information about you to release that information to you. They may have reasons without burdening you too much with the legal framework. They may want to challenge your application, but you have a right to ask, and you absolutely should do. You absolutely should do. Back to Jane. A manager asked me if I could take my hair off when I sat at the front. Amazing. Jane, I mean, seriously, I'm wondering how you then managed to deal with that, because I'm assuming you weren't sitting by yourself with this manager and it was said in front of a number of people. And I'm just wondering why that manager thought was appropriate, and whether you were able to address it with that manager either in that scenario or not. That sounds horrific. Hi Lily, that's really fascinating. I never knew we can ask for information. Absolutely you can. I guess, how do you know if they are completely transparent when they share? That's a difficulty. That's a difficulty that as a barrister I have to obviously deal with in court all the time. That's a difficulty even as a mediator I have to deal with. And that's one of the major issues that people have with mediation. How do they know when they come to a mediation that the other person is going to be giving full and frank disclosure? Let me answer that question. Sometimes you may never know the truth. Sometimes you may never know the whole truth and nothing but the truth. However, there is still a reality that exists. And if that reality means that you can move forward because you've been able to address the problem, and the problem doesn't follow you, then it really doesn't matter. Because you can ask a question over and over and over and over and over and over again and never get the answer that you want. But what I would say to the person who is suffering is it's not necessarily the answer that's important, but the outcome. If you can address the problem, and if you can ensure that that problem won't follow you into the future, then that's all you need. How do you make the distinction between unconscious bias and microaggression? Lisa, that's a really good question. And it's almost like saying to me, well, how do you make the difference? Because somebody's asked me, well, how do you know the difference between passive aggressive and microaggression and unconscious bias? They can all intertwine. They really can. And when we're looking at passive aggressive act, you can sometimes find that in a microaggressive act. So for example, you can have a passive aggressive act where you say to somebody, I'm going on a diet tomorrow, guys, just want you all to know I'm going on a diet tomorrow, guys. And what does John or Jane do, or Shaquille or whoever it is do? They come in the next day and they're like, cake's on me, guys, I've got loads of cake. Come on, Paula, you want a cake, don't you? Yeah, you want a cake. Well, that's a classic passive aggressive example of where they're not trying to be mean, they're not trying to be cool. Come on, Paula, we love you, you're one of the guys, but they're sabotaging you. They're sabotaging you. When we're looking at unconscious bias, we are not looking at an intentional act. We're looking at a completely unintentional act. When we're looking at microaggression, we can have an intentional or unintentional act. And so you can see how the three of those can become intertwined in regards to one act, the cumulative act, or across the board. So there are a number of things to look out for. And that's why I said earlier, Lisa, don't worry about putting a title on your emotion. Don't worry about putting a title on how you feel. If you feel wronged, if you feel uncomfortable or unhappy, it's because something is wrong or something has made you feel unhappy. And that's what needs to be addressed. So although I'm giving you titles, what I want you to take away from this, whoever you are, guys, is that ultimately you have something that has happened to you. It has made you feel a particular way. In wanting to address it, you may have felt concerned or fearful about the reaction. That's enough of an indicator for me to tell you that this behavior needs to be addressed. Guys, we've run over time and Ellie's going to tell me off, but I've had such a lovely time with you. I've really enjoyed sharing my knowledge, and I hope that I get the opportunity to do this again. Guys, I really wish you all the best, and I really hope that ultimately you take something positive away from what can be, as I gave you an example in my own experience, an incredibly challenging time. But I promise you, you can find a positive way out of it. Just have faith in yourself and you will do. Thank you so much, guys.